Bueno, pues damos comienzo a esta primera sesión paralela de la mañana. Bienvenidos a todos y a todas a Madrid. Espero que esta conferencia internacional les resulte provechosa e interesante y que el sábado luzca algo más el sol y así puedan pasearse tranquilamente por Madrid. Welcome to all of you to Madrid. I hope you enjoy your stay and thank you to all of you for coming and to participate in this session. Esta sesión paralela que me toca moderar tiene por título Cambios en Educación Superior y Experiencias de Éxito. Como pueden comprobar por el horario o por el panel, hay profesores y personas que hablarán muchísimo mejor que yo sobre estos temas que nos van a exponer a continuación de diferentes países del mundo, muy interesantes y muy exóticos algunos, aparte de contar con dos profesoras de aquí, de la UNED de la casa. Si les parece, como tenemos un poco de tiempo y ruego nos disculpen por empezar un poco tarde esta sesión, si les parece lo que podemos hacer es, voy a dar paso a las diferentes ponencias o trabajos. Tendrán ustedes unos 10-15 minutos para presentarlas rápidamente, de una forma concisa, breve, ir a las conclusiones. Son todas muy interesantes, por lo cual les remito a todos, si quieren profundizar un poco más en las mismas, a que vayan al pendrive que se les ha proporcionado, por si quieren profundizar un poco más en lo que ellos estudian y comentan. Luego abriremos un turno de debate, por lo cual, si alguno de ustedes no culminara los 10-15 minutos que les vamos a dar de tiempo, acrecerá en el tiempo dedicado al público para que ustedes también intervengan. Si no intervienen, ya les he ido diciendo que yo les preguntaré alguna cosa, porque me he leído todas las ponencias, así que intentaremos motivar, activar un poco el debate, siempre contando con el poco tiempo que lamentablemente nos han dejado. Bien, en primer lugar y sin perder más tiempo, le vamos a dar la palabra a la profesora Miriam de la Concepción González Rabanal, que es profesora titular de Economía Aplicada en la Facultad de Derecho, ha sido directora del departamento y ha sido secretaria general de la Universidad Internacional Menéndez Pelayo. A continuación nos expondrá, me ha dicho que tiene un PowerPoint preparado, por lo cual, profesora, si quiere, 10-15 minutos y su tema de trabajo, el tema que nos va a exponer, trata sobre los retos de los docentes en un mundo globalizado, educación superior a distancia, una educación de calidad para todos. Tiene la palabra la profesora González Rabanal.
Buenos días. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Voy a empezar mi exposición hablando de los retos docentes en un mundo globalizado, refiriéndome especialmente a la educación a distancia, como no podía ser de otra manera, al pertenecer a esta universidad, la Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia, y planteando el tema de mi intervención desde el punto de vista de difundir la docencia, los conocimientos, pero también la calidad de los mismos. El contenido de mi intervención lo he estructurado en torno a estos puntos que aparecen representados en esta transparencia y básicamente creo que la idea central es que nos encontramos en un nuevo contexto caracterizado por la crisis económica, la globalización de las relaciones y por tanto también de los conocimientos y la necesidad de especializar los aprendizajes, al mismo tiempo que estos están sometidos a unos rápidos procesos de obsolescencia, de caducidad en definitiva. Es evidente que la educación superior se enfrenta en estos momentos a los retos tradicionales que ha venido asumiendo, es decir, a preparar a los alumnos para enfrentarse con éxito al ejercicio de su profesión. Y esto significa poder incardinar a estos alumnos, a estos egresados de los centros universitarios de educación superior en el mercado de trabajo de la forma más rápida posible, de la manera más acorde con su nivel de cualificaciones y, en definitiva, con los menores costes de transición. Pero al mismo tiempo es verdad que las instituciones de educación superior se enfrentan a nuevos retos que se derivan de la necesidad de contemplar el horizonte formativo de una forma mucho más compleja. Hay que hacer frente a las demandas derivadas de la globalización, de la innovación, de la internacionalización. Ello comporta la necesidad de tener presentes a la hora de diseñar los elementos que integran los currículums de nuestros alumnos que van a existir nuevas relaciones, las derivadas de un entorno laboral mucho más amplio, mucho más global, donde el trabajo en red es una necesidad y además donde es necesario habilitar a nuestros alumnos para la asunción de nuevas competencias. Refiriéndome a los tres ejes centrales sobre los que he centrado mi intervención, en primer lugar, la universidad y la crisis económica. Es verdad que la universidad, como señalaba antes, es el puente natural de tránsito desde la fase formativa institucional que reciben las personas hasta la fase productiva, cuando se incorporan al mercado de trabajo. Esto es así cuando los alumnos, en lugar de cursar los estudios de formación profesional, deciden realizar unos estudios de grado o de posgrado. Ya saben ustedes que en España, después de la reforma del proceso de Bolonia, básicamente y a grandes rasgos, los estudios de grado están estructurados en torno a 4 años, con carácter general, hay algunas excepciones, y los de posgrado en torno a 1 o 2 años. Esto no es así en el resto de países. Hay muchos países, la mayoría de ellos, que se han incardinado en el marco de Bolonia y tienen una estructura temporal diferente, 3 años para los grados y 2 para los posgrados. Pero en todo caso lo que se pretende con los grados, como saben, es suministrar una formación básica y contemplar la formación del posgrado, salvo algunas excepciones que el propio posgrado habilita para el ejercicio de la profesión, como una formación mucho más especializada. Sin embargo, a pesar de los cambios que ha supuesto el contexto y el nuevo marco de referencia de los estudios de Bolonia, es verdad que la universidad no puede dar la espalda al momento de crisis económica que estamos viviendo. Un momento de crisis económica de carácter generalizado, no solamente tenemos en España, sino en otros países, sino que abarca prácticamente a la totalidad del mundo. Quizás es menos significativo en aquellos países que categorizamos dentro de las llamadas economías emergentes. Este nuevo contexto de crisis económica impone llevar a cabo reformas de calado en el mercado laboral, en el tejido productivo y, en consecuencia, también, como no podía ser de otra manera, en el diseño del currículum que las instituciones de educación superior proporcionan a los alumnos. Ello comporta que la universidad tiene que, en estos momentos, adiestrar para el trabajo en equipo, tiene que acomodarse y anticiparse a la demanda de nuevas profesiones, de nuevos requerimientos, de nuevas capacidades, de nuevas aptitudes, de nuevas habilidades que son las que demanda el mercado de trabajo. Y además tiene que ser consciente de que hay que preparar a nuestros alumnos para hacerles cada vez más hábiles, más dúctiles para moverse en un entorno laboral que es cambiante y donde las fronteras geográficas son totalmente borrosas y prácticamente difusas. Esto significa que tenemos que preparar a nuestros alumnos para vivir en lo que algunos autores han denominado la aldea planetaria. Anticiparse, en definitiva, a las necesidades de formación, evitar la fuga de cerebros. Yo creo que esto es uno de los grandes problemas a los que nos enfrentaremos en los próximos años y posibilitar la movilidad del factor humano y la empleabilidad del mismo. He señalado que otro de los argumentos en los cuales se centraba la intervención era la necesidad de especializar los aprendizajes, teniendo en cuenta que hay que formar no solamente en un momento concreto de la etapa de las personas, de la vida de las personas, sino formar con carácter permanente. Esto significa que la universidad tiene que ser capaz de diseñar currículums flexibles, ágiles, que puedan incorporar las innovaciones y los avances del conocimiento. Tenemos que ser conscientes de que hay que ampliar la formación de nuestros egresados más allá del momento en el que finalizan sus estudios de grado o de posgrado, y en este sentido yo creo que el papel de la educación permanente y la universidad en la que estamos y en la que me siento vinculada, la UNED, yo creo que tiene una larga y amplísima trayectoria y quizás innovadora trayectoria en todo lo que ha constituido su plan de formación de educación permanente, haciendo prácticamente una formación a medida y tratando de colmar nichos del mercado. Por lo tanto, todo esto hay que circunscribirlo y enmarcarlo para dar una respuesta ágil al imperativo del reciclaje al que deben estar sometidos y estamos sometidos todos en este mundo cada vez más global, cada vez más dinámico, cada vez más imbuido de nuevas tecnologías. Y digo que debemos estar sometidos todos porque no solamente se trata de que reciclemos los conocimientos de aquellos que salen de nuestras enseñanzas, sino que ello comporta también un importante esfuerzo de reciclaje por parte del profesorado universitario. Es necesario dotar a los alumnos de herramientas que les permitan en el futuro aprovechar las oportunidades que el mercado de trabajo les va a brindar, y para ello tienen que familiarizarse con el manejo de estas tecnologías y, por supuesto, tratar de que sean mínimos los riesgos desestabilizadores. Y con esto quiero hacer referencia a que tampoco podemos perder de vista que esta especie de inmersión que hacemos en las nuevas tecnologías no nos debe hacer olvidar el papel humano, la calidad de las relaciones humanas que deben de potenciarse y desarrollarse más allá de las aulas universitarias. El conocimiento de las nuevas tecnologías comporta un importante reto para todos los implicados en los procesos educativos, los alumnos, los profesores, pero como señalaba hace un momento, es necesario también potenciar y favorecer el desarrollo de la cálida comunicación humana. Hay que introducir por ello cambios complejos de calado en el planteamiento de las enseñanzas universitarias que van más allá del ajuste metodológico que nos exigen los retos del nuevo espacio europeo de educación superior, fundamentalmente de Bolonia, en el contexto del marco europeo. Estas exigencias, señalo, comparten y comportan cambios sustanciales que requieren formación nueva para los profesorados a los que hay que adiestrar, los cuales nos tenemos que adiestrar en el manejo y la familiarización de estas nuevas herramientas. Por lo tanto, el tiempo de trabajo que dedicamos a la enseñanza no solamente va dedicado a la preparación y a la actualización de los conocimientos de los que somos responsables, sino también a adiestrarnos en el manejo de esas herramientas que nos permiten hacerlos accesibles y asequibles a todos aquellos, sobre todo, que pueden hacer uso de estas nuevas tecnologías. Como señalaba alguno de los participantes en la mesa redonda anterior, en este sentido las herramientas de los MOOC y las páginas web yo creo que han representado un punto de inflexión en lo que debe ser la transmisión universal del conocimiento. ¿Cuáles son los retos a los que nos enfrentamos en el futuro, a los que nos estamos enfrentando ya en este presente en el cual estamos inmersos? De dos clases, me atrevería a decir yo. Por un lado, un reto tecnológico. Ya he hecho referencia anteriormente en mi exposición a lo que significa este reto tecnológico, pero también no nos debemos olvidar de lo que representa un reto de carácter moral, representado en todo caso por la defensa de la privacidad, la identidad y la libertad del individuo. Los individuos tienen que ser libres para elegir, tienen que tener acceso a aquellos conocimientos, sin duda, porque una sociedad más justa y más igualitaria se producirá cuando todos tengamos acceso al conocimiento de una forma más sencilla, menos costosa, y menos costosa no solamente en términos de recursos económicos, sino también menos costosa en términos del uso de nuestro escaso tiempo, que dedicamos, como sabemos, bien al trabajo o bien al ocio. Ya para no extenderme más, querría hacer una referencia a modo de conclusión. Yo creo que en estos momentos los grandes retos o las grandes cuestiones que tiene que abordar cualquier institución de enseñanza universitaria, de enseñanza superior, se pueden circunscribir a alguno de los epígrafes que contemplo a continuación. En primer lugar, se trataría de dar una respuesta integradora a la diversidad cultural. A la medida que el mundo se ha hecho más global, las relaciones se han hecho más internacionales, ya no nos dirigimos a un colectivo homogéneo, ni homogéneo por grado de formación previa, ni homogéneo en términos de edad, ni homogéneo en términos de procedencia. Nos dirigimos a un colectivo global que tiene unas raíces culturales diferentes, que tiene unas tradiciones también diversas y que esta diversidad tiene que ser contemplada y asumida por la universidad también como un elemento de indudable enriquecimiento. Hay que poner también por ello énfasis en la necesidad de abarcar o de plantearnos conocimientos de carácter interdisciplinar. Yo creo que esta es una de las grandes carencias de la universidad. Hay que contemplar la enseñanza de forma transversal. Estamos demasiado acostumbrados quizás a mirar a nuestro propio ombligo, a nuestro propio ámbito, esfera de competencia, y perdemos un poco la perspectiva de conjunto que luego para el alumno resulta, creo, extraordinariamente enriquecedora. Conviene también enseñar y acostumbrarnos a desarrollar la pedagogía del ocio y del tiempo libre. Es importante transmitir a nuestros alumnos la necesidad de enseñar a crear ocio, hacer un ocio productivo, un ocio satisfactorio. Educar para toda la vida y para la vida, no solamente para una etapa concreta de la misma, sino también educar y enseñar y adiestrar en el manejo de todas aquellas actitudes y habilidades que nos van a permitir mantener nuestra trayectoria vital y, por supuesto, nuestra trayectoria laboral en un contexto cada vez más relacional. El trabajo en red es muy importante y no siempre estamos acostumbrados ni capacitados para manejarnos en el uso de las redes del conocimiento, redes interpersonales, no solamente de conocimiento, ni para liderar el trabajo en equipo. Yo creo que esto es muy importante. Es por ello necesario asumir como un reto también el diseño de un currículum flexible que sea capaz de adaptarse a las aptitudes e intereses de los estudiantes. Estamos asistiendo a un proyecto global, de enseñanza global, pero también necesitamos asumir la individualidad de los sujetos, potenciar el talento, favorecer la excelencia. Y esto solamente se consigue cuando somos capaces de identificar las fortalezas y las debilidades de cada alumno. Indudablemente, como resumen, pues es importante que la universidad forme en temas básicos para que los alumnos puedan adaptarse a las necesidades que se derivan de un entorno laboral cada vez más cambiante y más globalizado, y al mismo tiempo suministrarles unas herramientas de reciclaje y de formación permanente que hagan que su paso por la universidad no sea algo que se cierra en sí mismo, sino que su paso por la universidad sea una impronta que les deja marca y les deja huella y les permite seguir mejorando a nivel individual, pero también a nivel profesional a lo largo de toda su trayectoria vital. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, profesora González Rabanal. Nos ha lanzado un buen reto, el de la conciliación tanto de las nuevas tecnologías, de las habilidades, destrezas, en todas estas tecnologías tan cambiantes en este mundo que nos ha tocado vivir ahora de crisis. Su ponencia es muy certera y muy actual, tanto la conciliación con la adaptación a estas nuevas tecnologías como la actualización en los conocimientos de nuestras disciplinas respectivas. Interesante reto el que nos lanza la profesora González Rabanal. A continuación, le voy a dar la palabra a Pamela Dottin, que es una estudiante de doctorado, a PhD student of the University of West Indies. Trabaja en el Quality Assurance Unit, y esta universidad de las Indias Orientales, o West Indies University, me ha comentado que da cobertura a 16, no son todos, sino a 16 países anglófonos caribeños, y me ha parecido una cuestión interesante y le dije que la iba a destacar para que todos nos situáramos. El estudio que presenta Pamela Dottin es unas conclusiones o parte de su trabajo, de su tesis doctoral, y nos va a explicar por qué los estudiantes o cuáles son los factores y motivaciones del abandono en la educación a distancia. Ella ha hecho un estudio, un análisis tanto de su universidad como de otras universidades, tanto presenciales como a distancia, y nos va a exponer cuáles son estas motivaciones que llevan al abandono en su universidad. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. As was mentioned, I'm actually a PhD student, and I'm looking at the factors that affect student success in distance online education in the Caribbean. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of the University of the West Indies. And I'm seeking to understand why persons are leaving us. Now, to give you a little background on the university itself, we have one of our first persons, Sherlock and Nettleford. They actually said that the University of the West Indies is a light of liberty and learning. So that's the whole context of the university. Now, the university we actually have 3 physical campuses and 1 open campus. And the open campus itself offers education in a number of modalities. So we offer face-to-face, we offer blended and fully online programs. And we serve actually 16 Anglophone countries within the Caribbean, so it's a regional university. We have a mission that is to advance education and to create knowledge, and you can see the rest there, through excellence in teaching, research, innovation, public service, and so on. Now, the rationale for this study really is that when I joined the university about 4 years ago, I had this concept that persons were leaving the online education forum, and I thought that more persons were leaving that forum than the face-to-face forum. So I wanted to find out what was actually influencing that move. And one of the things that I did is that I started to look at the type of education that was happening in the Caribbean traditionally. And what we found is that traditionally we had traditional didactic education where the teacher was the focus of the education forum. So everything kind of focused around the teacher, and whereas with the online education it was more constructivist in nature, where you were asking students to be more the teaching that would be more students focused, but the students were being asked to be more reliant on themselves. So it was this whole transition from being a child learner who was more dependent on the tutor, and an adult learner who was more independent, if you like. Now, the design for this study, I looked back over the 4 years of the Open Campus Life from 2008 to 2010-11, and I targeted these persons, and you will see that the confidence level for each year varies. And in the first year it was 8.8, and it went down the final year to 4.6. And as you will know, for educational purposes, you normally want a confidence level of something like 5%. So we were kind of there because we had 8.8, 5.7, 6.2, and 4.6. Now, when we looked at the age range, one of the things that the literature is suggesting is that although there's a move where younger persons are joining or are taking more online programs, traditionally the suggestion has always been is that it was attracting more persons really within 35 to 44 age limit. What we found at the university was that we were attracting more 26 to 34, and if you look at the 17 to 25, that it was a up and rising number as well. Now, I kind of looked at other studies to see what they were saying and some of the reasons for persons leaving, and they came up with several things, including academic difficulties, unhappiness with the social environment, and so on. Now, one of the things that I think you will be aware of, that normally when you're working in an online environment, one of the things that persons always say is they talk about the transactional distance, and it is psychological distance that students feel when they're not in an environment where they can see the tutors and they can see each other. So I wanted to find out whether or not that also influenced what was happening. Now, I did a comparison of the attrition rate at the university for the 4 campuses, and what you can see from there is that the Open Campus had an attrition rate of 28.5% as compared to Mona, which had 9.0%. But bearing in mind that the literature suggests that in distance and online learning, that it's quite normal for the online component to have a higher attrition rate, and it normally says sometimes up to 20% more. So we were within the norm. However, what I wanted to do is that I wanted to break it down a little further. I wasn't just happy in looking at what was happening at the campuses as a whole, but I wanted to find out what was happening in specific programs. So I did a comparison of the attrition of management studies among the campuses. And once again, it showed that the Open Campus's attrition rate was higher when compared to the other 3 physical campuses. Now, what the research was looking to find out was the factors, as I said before, and I identified several things. I looked at learning preferences, I looked at interaction, meaning the tutor and student interaction, and the student and student interaction. And when I ran some correlations looking at what students were saying and what was the major reason for leaving. Now, if you look at this question actually asked them to state whether or not they needed more interaction, or whether they thought that the interaction between the tutor and themselves were not supportive enough, and whether or not that was a key factor why they left. And if you look at this, the learning preference, the first one that we looked at was visual learner. And for those persons, you will see that 66 out of the 129, so the majority of persons, visual learners, actually identified the lack of e-tutor support as a major reason. I also looked at it for course coordinator, but this one was quite interesting in that with the course coordinator, it was kind of close between the visual learner and the kinesthetic learner, so it wasn't really conclusive. Now, interestingly, when you looked at the learning preference and the need for face-to-face, because one of the things that our students were saying is that they wanted more face-to-face interaction. And once again, the visual learner was the persons that came up saying, well, this was a major reason why we were leaving. Time management, if you see the statistics, time management or the lack of time management was not really a key component why persons left distance education. Once again, now I kind of looked at as well at marital status to see whether or not there was a link between marital status and persons leaving. Because I was making the assumptions that persons who were married possibly had children and other responsibilities, and whereas single persons probably didn't have as much other things happening. So when we did this comparison, I found that with the course coordinators, once again, it was not really that very important, except but the married persons and the single persons were kind of close with not having the support from the course coordinator. But when you looked at marital status now and looked at the need for face-to-face, once again, this need for face-to-face came back up as an important component. And interestingly, the single persons were saying that they needed more face-to-face. Now at this stage, this is just my initial findings, and I'm kind of making some assumptions as to why a single person would be saying that they needed more face-to-face. And one of the things I was assuming was that normally when persons are married, they're accustomed to balancing all sorts of things like families and other commitments, and whereas the single persons who probably are younger might not have developed that skill. But at any rate, they're suggesting that they needed more face-to-face interaction to help them, and as a result, they were leaving. Time management, once again, single persons were saying, well, this is a major reason why we were leaving the online environment, and the married persons wasn't that important. Now, the initial conclusions are students with visual learning as preference identified the lack of tutor, and to a lesser extent, the course coordinator is a major factor. Students with a preference for visual learning also identified the need for more face-to-face interaction. There appears to be no link between learning preference and time management as a major factor. Both single and married students identified the lack of sufficient course coordinator support as a major factor. More single persons identified the need for face-to-face as a major factor. And single persons, as we said before, had this need, well, they needed to actually develop more time management skills. And because I suggested that because of that lack of time management skills, they were leaving. And those are my initial findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. A continuación, le vamos a dar la palabra a Gregory from Lehman. He told me before that I could call him Greg. So Greg for us. And wait, Greg, 1 second. Well, go ahead. Gregory es Dr. Gregory from Lehman. Trabaja o es Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Maryland University College. Y antes estaba hablando con Greg, y le pregunté que me parecía un poco curioso porque en su universidad, después de haber creado una plataforma virtual, nos va a comentar ahora por qué esa decisión de después de haber creado una plataforma virtual que diera cobertura a los estudiantes, a los estudios y demás, después de una serie de años decidieron cambiar de estrategia y buscar en el mercado, ya sea plataformas en abierto, plataformas comerciales, y cambiar de modelo de plataformas educativas. Le he comentado que en la UNED existe el modelo contrario. En principio nosotros usábamos una plataforma comercial que era la plataforma WebTT, y ahora hemos pasado a tener una plataforma propia nuestra que es la plataforma ALF. Y puede ser interesante para el debate, y le he preguntado que por qué este cambio, why do they choose or do you choose to change the platform to a commercial or an open source platform. Maybe the Vice Rector that is here, Miguel Santamaria, can talk to you later about platforms, and as well he's in charge of the innovation, coordination, and bueno, es el vicerrector de coordinación, calidad e innovación de la UNED, and he knows everything about platforms and about the plataforma ALF. He's there in the first room. Ay, por Dios, exactly. So later we can discuss with him as well. Thank you, Greg. Now you can tell us.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction, and I look forward to chatting with you afterwards. In fact, based on what was said, I wish you could have been with us through our own process. You probably could have helped us out. Well, good morning, everyone. The title of my presentation, as you can see, is Choosing a New Learning Management System. And my presentation is a case study to share how a very large university for which online education is very, very important was able to select a new learning management system. And I chaired the steering committee that was responsible for this process, and I'm very pleased to say that we feel it was a wonderful success. So what I want to do with you this morning is to share the principles in the approach that our experience confirmed as important to the success that we experienced. I think it's good to give you the kind of the outcome at the very beginning, or namely that we found two things, and we really knew this in advance of the process. First of all, in making a change to a new learning management system, it's not simply a technical exercise. The institution has to have clarity about its strategic goals and also, and most importantly, its approach to teaching and learning. And what this means really at a sociological level is that the institution has to be a real community. There has to be a real conversation within the university that would produce clarity about these two things. And second, the LMS selection process can't be viewed simply as a purchase or a procurement that is conducted by the business office. Because the LMS is implicated in the strategic goals of the university, because it touches things that are very important to faculty and students, you're not talking simply about a procurement or a purchase, you're talking about a change management process. And I'll elaborate on these points in just a moment. Just a word about the University of Maryland, University College, since we are confused with the University of Maryland. We are a state university. We are part of a university system that consists of 11 separate degree-granting institutions. University of Maryland, College Park, as we say, it's the research institution that's part of the system, is actually very close to us, a stone's throw, actually. But we are one of those 11 separate institutions. As a public institution, we are supported by state revenues, but as the case with many universities across the United States and elsewhere, the amount of support that we get from the state has been shrinking, so that now it's actually under 10% of our total budget, which is in excess of $300 million. What is our mission? These are actual photos from our recent graduation last fall, or last summer rather. UMUC is an open university, as most of the universities represented here. So our mission is to offer higher education opportunities primarily to adult students, wherever they may be, in the state of Maryland, across the United States, or around the world. And we do this by offering everything from 2-year degrees through a doctoral degree in management. And apart from the United States, those who know us well know that we have very large programs in Europe and in Asia. In fact, we have about 35,000 students overseas. So, why is the LMS so important to the University of Maryland, University College? Well, if you look at the statistics on the slide, I think they tell the story. These data are from last year. So last year we had almost 100,000 students. Most of these students take online courses. 80% take at least one, but most of our students take far more than one. And really this makes sense given who our students are. The average age of our student is 32. Our data show that most of them are married, most of them are working, most of them have children. They're coming back to school to get a degree because they know this is their ticket to advancement. And so they need a format that's flexible, and online education, of course, offers that format. Obviously, to support 262,000 online enrollments, which is what those 100,000 students translated into when they went online, we've had a learning management system. We call that system WebTyco. We put it together internally 1999, 2000, fielded it in the 2000-2001 academic year. And you know what? That system has served us extremely well in the last 10 or 12 years. In fact, we know about 2 million enrollments have been supported by that platform during that period of time. But institutions change, technology changes, there are other developments, and we came to the conclusion that while WebTyco for a large part of our history was part of our success, now it's a limiting factor, and it's something that we have to change. What are some of the problems that we have seen with our learning management system? Pamela mentioned the importance of student success, and that's what her research is about. In the United States, there's a very big movement called predictive analytics. This is about taking all the data that you have about a student, where they went to school, how old they are, their ethnicity, how they behave, how they interact with the university, how they behave in the online platform. And you take all this data and you try to identify clusters of variables that point to students that are more at risk and students that are less at risk. And then those students that are more at risk are students that you try various interventions with, whether it's e-tutors or coordinators or other types of interventions. One problem with WebTyco is we could not get data out of the system. We could not see all the footprints of the students, where they go first, how long they stay in different places in the learning management system, and therefore could not include that data in our own analysis. Very limited collaboration tools. I'm embarrassed to say that even as I stand here today, I don't think there's a wiki in WebTyco. It's built around an old pedagogical model. It does not support competency-based learning. And then there's an absence of rule-based features that would make the administration of courses easier for faculty and also would support student success. And by rule-based features, I'm talking about things like the system itself monitoring students who are enrolled in the class, who don't show up for the first week, automatically sending them an email asking them if they need assistance of some sort without anybody monitoring the attendance of that student. These rule-based features are extremely important both to creating more time for faculty to focus on teaching and to support student success. So, what were the options for us? Unlike 2000, 2001, there now is a market, a commercial market of learning management systems. And, but there's also an open source community that is creating systems. So when we looked out our windows, we saw 5 or 6 possibilities for us. And I'm sure the possibilities on the slide are the ones recognizable for the most part by you. Our first step was to actually hire a consultant. We were aware of many of these options, but they differ in cost, they differ in their architecture, they differ in their technology roadmap. When Blackboard or Pearson or Desire to Learn look to the future, where are they going to make their investments in their LMS? That's all very important information to have in evaluating these systems. To undertake an evaluation, you need criteria. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what these would be, and in fact, we kept this consultant to help us think about the question of criteria. Eventually, we ended up with 3 categories. First are threshold criteria. Second were substantive academic criteria, and third were financial factors that we had to look at. And these really were 3 sets of filters, because we used these criteria chronologically, and each time they limited the range of systems that we were considering. So we thought it was very useful to view them as filters. So what were the threshold criteria? Well, I think the name is suggestive. The threshold criteria were the basic business-related or technically related criteria that any system serving the University of Maryland, University College, a school of our scale, would have to meet. And I will say that the list of criteria that we came up with might be very different from another university depending on the size of that university and how important online education is to it. For us, because online education is very important, it was very important to us to know how long the firm had been in the market. If we're going to procure an LMS, we want to know that when we wake up tomorrow, that business is still there to support our platform. So business sustainability was a very important criterion for us. Obviously, the reliability of the platform. We want to grow, so the capacity to grow. Students like to learn on their own devices. They don't like to sit home and look at a computer all day. And so we're very much interested as a threshold criterion in the maturity of the mobile solution. And there are others that I can mention and that you can see on the screen. And these are just formulated as words. Eventually, we had to involve the technicians to precisely define what you mean by reliability, what you mean by capacity to scale, and so on, and we did that. And I didn't provide these details here because I don't think they're that important to the point that I want to make. The second filter are the substantive academic criteria. The first set of criteria are things that faculty and students aren't going to really argue about. But when you get to the substantive academic criteria, and basically we're concerned with how does the platform, in the way it appears to the user, support teaching and learning, those are things that faculty will argue about. Those are things that students will be concerned about and academic administrators will be interested in. And so these criteria are very important to evaluation, and they constituted a second filter for us. So again, I don't want to read them all, but concerned with things like how can we provide the best online experience by facilitating engagement and social learning? Can the platform support an outcomes-based learning model? Does it provide for increased faculty engagement? And does it allow us to collect granular data on student and faculty behavior and allow us to adopt future best-of-breed software that can support teaching and learning in the classroom? The third filter, of course, is the financial analysis. The objective of the whole process is to get the best value for the university. The assumption is that you will pick the system that's best on the merits, that meets the threshold criteria, that meets your substantive academic criteria. But when you get to the evaluation of cost, you may find that the system that comes out on top as a result of your evaluation is a system you can't afford. And so then you have to look at your second pick or your third pick and evaluate the trade-off between cost and the features that you're giving up by moving away from your first choice. But it's the clarity of your criteria that will enable you to very clearly focus what your trade-offs are and even in that situation to make the best decision that you can. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about criteria, and I'm going to try to end in the next 4 minutes or so, 4 or 5 minutes. Why change management? Well, good criteria are important to a good decision, but of course, criteria don't make decisions. People make decisions. And the case is, as I mentioned, that when you talk about the learning management system, which is in essence the classroom for many faculty and many students, faculty, students, and academic administrators are going to be very, very interested in participating in the choice of that system. So to mount an effective selection process, you have to really respect the culture of the university. Our university is very much like others. We value the role of the faculty member. We have advisory councils of faculty, students, and staff that advise the administration. We have external agencies that expect a collaborative environment. And so we looked at those attributes and we really distilled 3 values that informed our whole process: inclusiveness, transparency, and integrity. Those are the 3 values that informed our process. I think everybody knows what we mean by inclusiveness and transparency. By integrity, we meant that once we agree on what the criteria are, those are the criteria that we will use. We will not arbitrarily depart from them. So, how do you organize a large university for a change management process? I mentioned that we have 100,000 students. We have 400 or 500 full-time faculty, but you know what? You can't teach 100,000 students, which translates into maybe 10,000 course sections, with 400 or 500 full-time faculty. So we have about 4,000 part-time faculty who assist us in teaching our courses. So, and they're distributed all over the world. And so the challenge is, how can you be inclusive and still run a process that, number 1, gets to a result, and number 2, is a result that everybody feels good about? Well, that was our challenge, and I think we met it well. I think the key is, first, you need a core management group. And you can see on the slide the management structure that we devised for this process. There was a steering committee which consisted of 5 or 6 senior administrators. I chaired this group, but we had our chief information officer on that group. We had several of our deans on that group. The idea was to make this a small but highly representative group of all the major stakeholders across the university. But they're all line administrators, and they all understand that a job has to get done. We had a project team, which was a larger group of 20 to 30 people, representing, again, major stakeholder units across the university. But these are people who would bring particular expertise to the project. And finally, really operating between the steering committee and the project team was a professional program manager, basically a professional project manager who led the project team, helped plan the evaluation process, and would bring information to the steering committee for discussion and decision making. So, how did we actually conduct the evaluation itself? Well, we constructed this management group that I have just described. The second thing we did was to simplify the process of evaluation, and I won't go into those details. The third thing, though, was to create a representative evaluation process. And finally, we communicated as often as we felt was necessary about the process that we were following. When we conducted the evaluation of the final contenders for our LMS system, we constructed the evaluation in this way. We had 3 user groups and we had 3 technical groups. Let me focus on the user groups because that's really where the legitimacy of the process resided, or the perception of legitimacy. Because faculty are extremely vocal about things that they care about, whether it's textbooks or LMSs, we thought it very, very important to not involve simply a small subset of our faculty in the evaluation, but to open participation up to the faculty at large. So in 2 or 3 email invitations over a period of 1 month, we invited all 4,000 to 5,000 faculty to participate in the evaluation process if they wanted to. And of course, if they all wanted to, that would be a major staging effort, so it required conversations with our vendors so that they could support the evaluation if that's how many would come. And so this was the faculty at large group. And I will tell you that in the end, the invitation was more important than the number of faculty actually participating, because out of the 4,000 or 5,000, exactly 115 answered the call to service. In addition to, but we called this the faculty at large group because that's how they were constituted. We had a faculty focus group, hand-picked faculty, about 40, to be sure that we had a representative group of faculty that would be looking at our system, and then a student focus group because students have preferences too. We constructed use cases for each of these groups to use in evaluating the system, and basically a use case is a scripted set of instructions about what features of the LMS that group is supposed to look at. And then they provide feedback in a structured survey instrument. This ensures that the data is comparable across individuals within the same user group. And the use cases were different for faculty at large, the faculty focus group, and for the user group, the student focus group. And again, we had our 3 technical groups that were involved in the evaluation of the system. This was the evaluation on the merits, you might say, and that evaluation process identified well, it sorted out the finalists in first, second, or third ranking. And the last step was a financial analysis that would look at the costs of these systems and then line up the costs with our preferences. And the remarkable thing about this process, as diverse as the focus groups were, faculty at large, faculty focus group, student focus group, 3 technical groups, the project team, the IT engineers, and then there was an administrative group. The remarkable thing was every one of these groups placed the same system in the #1 spot. There was no disagreement among the faculty. There was no disagreement between students and faculty. There was no disagreement between users and technicians. Everybody agreed about the top choice. And the wonderful thing for us was that the top choice was also the least expensive system. And so there was no trade-off for us to make. We ended up in an optimal position. So what are the lessons that we validated? These are 5 or 6 lessons that I formulated for us this morning. At the start, I think there has to be a consensus that there's a need for change. And this may require some leadership. It doesn't automatically happen. But it's usually a combination of administrators who are current about what's going on in the general environment. And there are always faculty leaders who are also very much aware of the changes in technology and the opportunities and can be part of a positive voice for change. There have to be clear criteria and a community consensus that that really reflects what the business, the strategic business needs and the academic goals of the university are. There has to be an effective management structure. Change does require care and it does require planning. And I think it's important that it be led by line administrators who are leading representative groups. It doesn't mean that they're heavy-handed, but they always have an eye on the clock and know that decisions have to be made and the process has to move forward. And you have to have a deeply participatory process for all of the users who are involved in the final evaluation. This provides more information for decision making, and as I've mentioned repeatedly, it's essential to the perception of legitimacy. Communication is very important, and I'll tell you, I woke up to this late in the process, but it really is a plan in and of itself. It's its own project plan. What the communication is to the general community, but also all the communication that's involved in coordinating the evaluation process among user groups. And we use multiple channels, including meetings, email, and website. And then finally, I can't understate the importance of project managers, professional project managers. It is an art, and a good project manager will be very good at identifying holes in your planning and holding the whole process accountable to a given timeline. So, as I said, we had this whole process took about 18 months for us, longer than we had expected, but all's well that ends well. We're very pleased with the result. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. A continuación tiene la palabra Fátima Baima de Oliveira, que es profesora de educación y trabaja en la Fundación Getúlio Vargas de Río de Janeiro y de Brasil, y nos viene a contar una experiencia piloto que se ha llevado a cabo en la universidad, en la Open University de Brasil, y nos contará los resultados y a los que han llegado y a ver que nos cuente un poco más sus experiencias exitosas, como bien anunciaba el título de esta sesión. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here at UNED and participate at this conference, ECD, both very prestigious institution. The presentation will be based in a pilot course in Brazil, and specific in one of the most poor regions in Brazil, is the northeast of Brazil, and this presentation was developed by Professor Roberto Serra, that's here at the audience, and also with Professor Luciana and me. As I have just mentioned, the importance of this study is trying to answer the question, what's the influence of the configuration, and I'm going to explain in a few minutes what we mean as configuration for the management of these administration courses to distance education in Brazil, and the importance of the ENAD. ENAD is an exam that all undergraduate or all students that are taking an undergraduate course have to pass through. And this examination, it's important because it belongs to a process that started about 10 years ago, or a little bit more than 10 years in Brazil, putting focus in evaluation. We come from a country that in the recent past did not put emphasis on the importance of evaluation. Okay, moving, okay. And didn't put so much emphasis on the importance of evaluation. And about 10 to 15 years ago, ENAD and lots of guidelines were established trying to improve the quality of several courses and programs in Brazil. So what the focus of this presentation is to see the guideline established by ENAD that gives the rank of the better universities in Brazil and the better courses could influence the results in the courses on the distance educational courses in Brazil. And so what you mean as configuration? Configure is indeed the management structure that was established by three universities, because we were studying three institutions in Brazil. Of course, there are much more federal and state universities, but the study only contemplates three universities. All the three similar because they are located in the same region, that's the northeast of Brazil. The first one is the University of Maranhão, the second one the University of Ceará, and the third one it's the another university also in northeast of Brazil. And we were trying to compare the interrelations between the distance learning, the organizational structure that was developed to be able to offer those courses, and also the systemic approach. And this slide has to do with what you call like the model of analysis. That there are like the dimensions that were studied that has to be with the complexity, and the complex also is divided in several other variables, the distribution of tasks, the hierarchical structure, departmentalization, and how was the decision-making process, and how about also the coordination in those three universities. And also we were studying the educational design and the resources, infrastructure resources, and the communication that was defined by this structure. The study was predominantly a qualitative study, and there was several interviews with the group of students, professors, and tutors. Also, there was focus group, and different methods were applied in order to see the congruence between them that we call as a triangulation. Also, in terms of the objective and also the people that participated in this study. We have like the three coordinators, because they were like the director of those three of this Open University in Brazil, and also the tutors, the professors, like 26 professors, tutors, and students, and as I mentioned, also there were the focal groups. And then we tried to compare what was the outcomes when you compare complexity in the three universities, in Maranhão, in Paraíba, and in Ceará. And we are going to have different results. And some are similar, but usually there is a lot of singularities on those universities, although there are the guidelines established by the Brazilian government, as I mentioned, trying to give the guidelines to improve the distance education in Brazil. And we do the same concerning decentralization, that, as was mentioned before, was one of the variables in the three universities. And each one of those variables is it's studied separately, as we can see from these slides, like the coordination and the control, and the educational design, and the resources in those institutions. So in this slide, there is like a whole design of the variable that were considered in the study. And this is another way of showing also how those variable and components can be presented in a comparative summary. And what you can see as the main findings is that, like, according to complexity, those universities like UEMA in Maranhão and the other one in Ceará, that those that follow the principle has to be the guidelines established, even being in a pilot experience, you know, that was the first course that was offered. They try to show they have different and better performance. And the same applies to the centralization, like the UEMA and UFC were much more close to the evaluating procedures that were established, and the outcomes in the ENAD, that is the examination that I mentioned, was much better. The students had higher grades. And according to coordination and control, we can also see, we can also state, according to the research, that the UEMA and UFC had a better performance in ENAD. And according to the assumptions and the design of the courses also. And so we go and see each guideline that was established, trying to compare on those three universities. But when you see about the didactic materials, there was not so much influence in the outcomes. You cannot see, you cannot assure and state that there are considerable difference between the three universities. And according to evaluation, the participation of teachers in the process and encouraging the evaluation process, you can also see that when there was like a high frequency and much closer participation, also the results, there was a tendency to be better than the university that did not follow very close the guidelines. And the same can be explained in terms of the multidisciplinary team. That was another variable that is deeply emphasized in the guidelines. And you see those that had a better performance at the ENAD examination in Brazil. And we can also say, apply the same way of doing the study to the communication variable. Infrastructure, also you cannot see like too many difference in those universities. The behavior are very close between the three. And according to the final consideration, what we can say from this study is that it is important, of course, the configuration, and how important it is to have the guidelines. And it's really important to focus on this, because different from countries in Europe, the history of decent education in Brazil, it's recently, you know, in practical terms. And but each time there is a expansion of institution and the enrollment of students, and each time the government realize how important it is to the improvement of education in Brazil. Brazil is it's a country that has a lot of Brazil inside it. What does it mean? That there are very difference between the regions in Brazil. The south of Brazil, it's the richest area of Brazil, and more than 50% of the university and the professors are located in the south of Brazil. So this means how important it is, like to divulgate results like that, because this can encourage other programs to follow the guideline that was established by people that really work with this subject. And there is like participation from those that have background in the area, no matter from where they come, if they come from the private sector, the public sector, the non-governmental institution from abroad, but the importance is to have guidelines and to see that it makes difference. And in a country as Brazil, it's really very important to recognize how distance education is relevant for the education. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't have a culture of evaluation, and you also do not have a culture that's very recently in terms of distance education. So if you take this in consideration, it's really relevant to say and to emphasize and to discuss this. And when you see that traditionally those that have the opportunity to go to attend undergraduate courses are those that come from wealthier family, and most of them, of course, have it's easier to be successful, and it's really a challenge to the inclusion. Like this is the name of this conference is putting emphasis on innovation and inclusion. You know, I would say that in my country traditionally, it's much easier to talk about innovation because it's a system that has much to do with those that had the opportunity to study. The great challenge is how to reduce the dropout of the students, that as they are not, they were not brought up in a family that values education. That is the real change. That's the really that's the challenge. No, because those that were brought up are always listening that how important is education to change the social hierarchy, how to be like better jobs. They do not have a high dropout because they know this since they were born. But for those that do not come from wealth family, it's really difficult to do this, you know. So those are some of the finds and remarkable things to share with you. Thank you for the attention and patience to listen my Spanglish in the presentation. Thank you.
Bueno, a continuación, y ya como última ponencia, como dirían los ingleses, last but not least, ni mucho menos, porque la profesora Ángeles Sánchez Elvira nos va a contar una experiencia nueva que se ha llevado a cabo en la UNED durante este curso académico 2012-2013, que seguramente les va a resultar muy interesante. Nos va a contar, se llama EUNED, Primeros Pasos. Viene de los antiguos planes de acogida para que los estudiantes que ingresan o acceden por primera vez a la universidad no se sientan solos, se sientan acompañados, sepan de qué va la universidad a distancia, cómo se estudia en la metodología semipresencial, pero también conozcan nuestra Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia. La profesora Ángeles Sánchez Elvira es profesora titular de universidad de Psicología de las Diferencias Individuales. Asimismo, es directora del IUED, Instituto Universitario de Educación a Distancia. Este instituto nos está constantemente proponiendo diferentes cursos, actividades, talleres de formación en nuevas tecnologías, las plataformas virtuales. Está constantemente proponiendo diferentes actividades tanto a los profesores como a los tutores y como a cualquier miembro de la comunidad universitaria de la UNED, por lo cual es un instituto muy interesante. Y también la profesora Ángeles Sánchez Elvira dirige el curso iberoamericano de educación a distancia, ya es su 30ª edición, y aquí está ella para comentarnos este nuevo curso, EUNED Primeros Pasos. Muchísimas gracias, profesora.
Gracias, Araceli. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Thank you for being here at this time of the afternoon. Y voy a contar justamente lo que ha dicho Araceli, es decir, nos preocupa muchísimo el estudiante nuevo, supongo que como cualquier responsable en una universidad a distancia. La UNED, 40 años, 250.000 estudiantes, es una mega universidad y cada año tenemos en torno a 60.000 estudiantes nuevos. Estudiantes que imagino que, como cualquiera de los estudiantes que se matriculan en las universidades a distancia en las que estamos trabajando, son estudiantes adultos que trabajan, que vienen habitualmente de un sistema presencial, desconocen lo que es la educación a distancia, desconocen muchas veces las tecnologías, ahora cada vez menos, pero desde luego una población adulta no las utilizan muchas veces habitualmente, y en muchas ocasiones hace muchos años que han dejado de estudiar. Por eso ya hace mucho tiempo que nos empezó a preocupar todo el tema de cómo dar esa acogida, cómo preparar a nuestros estudiantes para un sistema como el nuestro, porque nos preocupaba cuestiones como las que se han tratado aquí, como el abandono. Es decir, el abandono es alto, pero no solamente el abandono, lo que queremos además es que las personas lleguen al finalizar ese primer año pues a sentirse que manejan los recursos de la universidad, que ya se encuentran integrados, y hay que trabajar, por tanto, en ello, y así desarrollamos lo que llamamos el plan de acogida de la UNED, que no es antiguo, bastante vigente, pero sí ya lleva unos años en funcionamiento, porque además es uno de los indicadores de calidad de los nuevos planes de estudio. Hemos considerado, quizás también por esa beta de psicología y de diferencias individuales con la que vengo, digamos, a desarrollar o a desempeñar mis funciones, que los estudiantes lógicamente difieren, somos todos distintos, somos individuos, pero la capacidad de aprender de manera autónoma y autorregulada es una característica fundamental, demostrada suficientemente que es clave para el éxito en cualquier sistema educativo, más en un sistema educativo a distancia, pero la buena noticia es que se entrena. Por tanto, todo nuestro plan de acogida se ha desarrollado en torno a esa idea de potenciar el aprendizaje autónomo del estudiante y ver cómo lo podemos hacer a lo largo del primer año. Consideramos que el primer año es clave. Y entendemos que hay que trabajar en tres etapas. La primera es la de información, que es la que precede a la matrícula, es decir, tener una buena información en las páginas web, saber darle al estudiante aquello que va a necesitar para saber dónde se va a meter, con qué metodología va a trabajar, qué se le va a exigir para que pueda planificarse. Una segunda etapa fundamental, que es la de formación del estudiante a lo largo del primer año para ser un estudiante a distancia, que es de la que vamos a hablar en la última acción que hemos emprendido, y desde luego ese seguimiento, es decir, no queremos simplemente darle la bienvenida y abandonarle, sino acompañarle durante todo el primer año. Por eso voy a hablar además fundamentalmente de las acciones de acogida en línea. Los centros asociados, tenemos 62, trabajan y han venido trabajando siempre en el plan de acogida presencial. Pero a nosotros nos preocupaba llegar a todos, a los 60.000 estudiantes nuevos, la mayor parte de los cuales no van a los centros asociados, porque precisamente por eso se han matriculado en una universidad a distancia, porque no tienen tiempo o no pueden ir a un centro asociado. Por tanto, las acciones de formación en esa fase segunda de entrenamiento para el estudio superior a distancia, las que hemos venido desarrollando durante estos años, casi todas tienen que ver con generar esas comunidades de aprendizaje en línea. Compartir, hacerles sentir que forman parte de un grupo, que no estén solos, con actividades que tienen que ver con aprendizaje no formal, como vamos a ver algunas de ellas, y aprendizaje formal, es decir, con créditos de libre configuración, como la que hoy les voy a contar. ¿Qué acciones hemos desarrollado durante todos estos años que hemos desarrollado el plan de acogida? Bueno, pues en primer lugar, no formales, es decir, sin créditos. Nos hemos propuesto tener cursos cero, cursos de nivelación. Los estudiantes vienen con diferentes niveles formativos. Bueno, pues cursos cero en abierto, aprovechando justamente el portal de recursos abiertos, el OCW, y ya nos estamos iniciando también con el tema de los cursos masivos en abierto, que hemos iniciado este año con el curso de competencias digitales en abierto, además conjuntamente en el marco de Ibervirtual con una universidad latinoamericana como es la UAPA, cuyos representantes están aquí. Competencias genéricas. Otro tipo de competencias que también necesitan los estudiantes. Bueno, pues desarrollar cursos de competencias también en abierto. Por supuesto, también estas se desarrollan después en los centros asociados. Y una idea que nos ha parecido muy buena y que desde hace 6 años pusimos en marcha, que son las comunidades virtuales de acogida. Espacios en línea donde damos de alta en cada facultad a los estudiantes nuevos de ese año en el espacio de su facultad y donde les acompañamos a lo largo de todo el año. No es un curso formal, pero les estamos acompañando, les preguntamos, les damos herramientas, instrumentos para que vayan desarrollando esa autonomía. ¿Y qué hemos hecho como cursos formales? Pues ya desde hace años teníamos el entrenamiento o el curso de entrenamiento en competencias para el estudio autorregulado a distancia, que realizan los estudiantes nuevos de manera voluntaria, pero es un curso con 3 créditos de libre configuración, muy intenso, y que también está en abierto. Es decir, todas las medidas que intentamos desarrollar, intentamos que vayan desde lo formal a lo informal o viceversa, es decir, que el alumno se acerque de la manera que quiera. ¿Y qué hemos desarrollado este año? Pues el EUNED Primeros Pasos. ¿Por qué? Porque las facultades nos pedían, digamos, un kit de emergencia, un kit inicial. No solamente tener la comunidad virtual de acogida, el ECEAD, sino algo inmediato, que durase poco tiempo y que los estudiantes tuvieran las herramientas más necesarias, más básicas para arrancar. El EUNED Primeros Pasos, por tanto, ha sido un curso que se ha creado este primer año. Hemos tenido una primera edición. Tiene un crédito europeo, un crédito reconocido, no es obligatorio, es voluntario. El alumno accede desde su comunidad virtual de acogida, se le anuncia, tiene una duración de 1 mes, está hecho para miles de estudiantes, es decir, que es masivo como casi todo en esta universidad. Consta de 12 pasos básicos, por eso los primeros pasos, 12 básicos, y está tutorizado, pero las actividades son de evaluación automática. Casi nos vamos al concepto de COMA o de MOOC, en esa idea de proporcionar una evaluación automática rápida y fácil. ¿Qué son los objetivos? Los más básicos es que nada más empezar conozca los elementos metodológicos de la UNED, los recursos que tiene, cómo se estudia, que se maneje con soltura, que es uno de los primeros problemas, por los campus virtuales que tiene la universidad, el campus, la plataforma de los cursos virtuales, es decir, que conozca todas las herramientas virtuales para que no tenga problemas cuando ya accede a las asignaturas, saber utilizar esos recursos que la UNED pone a su disposición e iniciar un poquito solo, porque por eso es un curso breve, lo que significa estudiar de manera autónoma y planificada. También como en los estudios que nos han contado en la tesis que se está llevando a cabo, nuestros estudios previos nos demuestran, los que estamos realizando, que la variable más perjudicial para los estudiantes a distancia es no saber planificarse ni manejar eficazmente su tiempo. Por tanto, iniciamos unas pequeñas, breves pinceladas durante ese curso que dura 1 mes para que puedan aprender a manejar su tiempo. Aquí están los 12 pasos, no tenemos mucho tiempo, está en la comunicación, no voy a entrar en ellos. Lo que se intenta es que sean motivadores, es decir, que presentárselos un poco combinando documentación con ejercicios en la propia plataforma, porque así se van familiarizando, pero que sea motivador para ellos. Esta es la vista dentro de nuestra plataforma, con el icono del EUNED Primeros Pasos. Y cada uno de los pasos contiene unas orientaciones, puesto que las orientaciones son fundamentales para cualquier estudiante a distancia, de cómo va a dar ese paso, unas actividades que tienen también sus orientaciones, sus materiales y un recuerda para que al terminar el paso no se le olvide qué era lo fundamental. Los materiales que hemos preparado son materiales muy diversos, es decir, hay desde las guías y las orientaciones grabadas, materiales multimedia, que intentamos que sea lo más ameno posible para el estudiante y también sencillo a la vez. Y al finalizar, pues le pedimos que valore el curso, evidentemente, y bueno, pues en una especie de juego inicial, al principio del todo le habíamos enviado un mensaje con una palabra, al finalizar tiene que hacer una especie de juego por el cual, pues muy en la línea del concepto de los badges o de las insignias de los MOOC, pues consiguen su insignia de Soy de la UNED al terminar el curso. El seguimiento se realiza a través de las comunidades. Contamos con el apoyo de nuestros 62 coordinadores de virtualización, que son tutores que nos ayudan en la formación en el IVD a los tutores y que están colaborando en la formación de los estudiantes, y un coordinador general que supervisa un poco lo que va ocurriendo en todas las comunidades. Y, por supuesto, también iniciamos esa idea del apoyo entre pares. Nos parece fundamental. Bueno, ¿qué ha pasado este año inicial? Hemos tenido 3.845 estudiantes que de manera voluntaria se inscribieron. Sí tengo que decir que el único problema es que empezamos un poquito tarde, porque nuestra idea es comenzar en el primer momento que ya se matriculan, antes de empezar los cursos. El 57% eran mujeres, 45% varones, 0,19 no contestó, y una edad media muy parecida a lo que es la edad media en la UNED, que son 33 años más o menos. La formación previa básicamente era formación profesional, curso de acceso, selectividad, es decir, lo habitual en la UNED, y la situación laboral también la habitual en la UNED, que es que el mayor porcentaje de estudiantes son trabajadores por cuenta ajena. ¿Qué pasó con la evolución del curso? Ahí sí nos hemos encontrado con alguna sorpresa y esperemos que el año que viene podamos promover que haya más participación. Inicialmente, como digo, se habían matriculado pues 3.845 estudiantes. Sin embargo, nada más empezar, ya el 50 y tantos % lo dejó. Creemos que probablemente porque empezamos más o menos en paralelo a cuando los estudiantes ya estaban en los cursos virtuales y a lo mejor ya estaban metidos en la vorágine de las asignaturas y no dedicaron ese tiempo, o les pareció que no podían, pero tenemos que explorarlo. Sin embargo, sí es cierto que luego después terminó un 31% y se quedó un 17% en el camino, que sí habían iniciado parte de las actividades pero que no llegaron a terminar. Interesante, puesto que nos gusta hacer investigación sobre qué ocurre, cómo son estos estudiantes. ¿Qué encontramos entre las características de aquellos que terminaron? Bueno, eran personas, lo que nosotros decimos, más engaged, más motivadas. También ha salido el tema de la motivación en una de las comunicaciones desde el principio, es decir, eran personas con más engagement. Tenían menos ansiedad ante los estudios, menos evitación de las dificultades. Bueno, pues son cosas que tenemos que ver para ver cómo ayudar a los que no tienen estas características, y aunque todos más o menos decían inicialmente que dominaban las TIC, pero estos que terminaron todavía tenían significativamente, estadísticamente, estas son diferencias estadísticamente significativas, dominaban mejor las TIC. La valoración final del curso, en la mayor parte de las preguntas estaba, desde luego, todo era valoración positiva, un promedio de 89,24% estaban entre que el curso, en cada uno de sus elementos, les parecía que era muy útil y que había sido muy interesante, entre bastante y totalmente. Y bueno, pues aquí están los ítems más valorados, entre ellos pues el primero, que realmente los pasos les habían parecido adecuados para lo que eran los objetivos del curso, es decir, que en ese sentido los que terminaron consideraron que les había resultado muy positivo. Y para concluir, me voy a concluir con las opiniones abiertas de algunos estudiantes que justamente nos devuelven algunas de las conclusiones que nosotros estábamos sacando de los datos. Primero, que el curso debe de estar desde el inicio, antes de que empiecen las asignaturas virtuales, que es cuando va a ser más útil. Algunos estudiantes dicen que debería tener un carácter obligatorio, eso puede ser que sea más difícil establecerlo así. Que hay que difundirlo más. Insisto que este año fue el primero, estábamos terminándolo casi cuando empezábamos el curso, y efectivamente pues hay que difundirlo por los tutores, en las tutorías académicas, a difundirlo previamente, desde luego, al inicio del curso. Algunos incluso pedían un segundo curso más avanzado, aunque eso más o menos lo tenemos con el ECEAD, y quizás pues, programar curso con distintos niveles para terminar de manera más flexible a distintos ritmos. Y eso es lo que les quería contar. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, profesora Sánchez Elvira. ¿Hay alguna pregunta breve, rápida? ¿No? Pues, si quieren, a modo de conclusión, les agradezco a todos los participantes. ¿Sí? ¿Tiene una duda? Un momento, que tienen un micrófono. Si quiere presentarse y decirnos de qué universidad viene,
Thank you very much for uh, giving me some time to make my point clear. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the organizers, UNED and ICD, for a wonderful conference, that too on a very important issue, that is mobilizing distance education for social justice and innovations. And particularly this session has been of great use, where many experiments have been talked about. I come from India. My name is Dr. T.R. Kame, the Vice Chancellor of Distance at Open University, Sri Venkateswara Open University. I've been associated with the Indira Gandhi Open Universities, a mega university in India. And with that background, I bring in some experience to share with you, Madam Chairperson rather. I think that the distance education or open education is not an alternative to the formal education. But the formal education being so rigid, expensive, and also time-taking, the distance education has its own merit and relevance in the society. We in India, a country of billions, have somewhere 1.4 million students in higher education, of which nearly 3 to 4 million are in the distance education. We have not kept the coverage of distance education only for the students, but largely for mobilizing the social justice as the topic here it is. One of the interesting experiments in India that has been carried out is that of educating the prisoners. There are in millions in a country like China, India, Brazil. There ought to be many, many prisoners. They have the right to go in for educations. Therefore, the distance education study centers with designed and very, typical kind of syllabi have been opened right in the jail, so that these people, when they are booked for several years, do channelize their energy and study. Another interesting case has been that of the soldiers. It's a force of somewhere, say, 1.3 million again, our forces, of which 50% enter into the systems as a high school or senior secondary school, and opening centers with them with typical kind of, flexibility in it. A lot of research, as has been told here, gone into it. The courses have been found very interesting, and many of them are making use. So that has been appreciated all over. The third area has been of what you call, the education has to be inclusive. ASEAN countries or India is not that as this very happy situation here, where out of 6 panelists, 1 is man and 5 are the women. There is a different case. The women are, for certain reasons, are not included in the system. Not only marriage, the typical system of family, raising the children, and so on. Therefore, the distance education has been very, very, very useful for the women folk and the other economically weaker section in the society. So my humble request to the august body would be here to find out ways as to how in these areas we can make the distance education more relevant, more useful, incorporating all whatever is being done as part of research in USA, Brazil, elsewhere. Let's think of these areas also, how to do that. And some of the experience of those countries who have already worked, particularly that of India, as I talked about, if are invited, would be very good. Though I wrote a paper, but then perhaps that has not been included. There was a full paper on it. I was late to send that, but we'll be sharing with the management committee to make use of whatever manner. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues totalmente de acuerdo en que son áreas muy importantes y en ese sentido también resaltar que, por ejemplo, en el caso de la Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia, hay dos áreas en las que la universidad está especialmente comprometida. Una es precisamente el programa de prisiones, es decir, cómo llevar la educación a distancia al programa de prisiones, y bueno, pues también eso se ha trasladado a otros países. De hecho, mañana habrá una comunicación de la UAPA de Dominicana también sobre el tema de la educación a distancia en prisiones. Y otra de las cuestiones que aquí no se ha tocado, que es el tema de la discapacidad. Es decir, la UNED también tiene una unidad de discapacitados, porque son dos áreas muy importantes de inclusión social. Es decir, si ya la educación a distancia pretende ser inclusiva, además pretende ser inclusiva especialmente con poblaciones que ya de por sí tienen marginación y que tienen más dificultades para acceder a la educación superior, ¿no? Entonces, pues creo que efectivamente que la educación a distancia es una solución, una respuesta, y que en el caso de la UNED, sobre todo estas dos áreas de prisiones y de discapacidad son especialmente importantes para nosotros, ¿no?
Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias a todos. Espero que los proyectos y las experiencias piloto sean las primeras de muchas por venir, que podamos empezar esos cursos desde el primer momento, esperemos que sí, el próximo curso. Muchas gracias por habernos ofrecido unas pinceladas sobre cómo elegir las plataformas virtuales. Gracias también, gracias también por, después de haber evaluado y haber detectado esos diferentes problemas y factores que motivan o ocasionan un abandono por parte de los estudiantes del sistema educativo universitario, pues habrá que tenerlos en cuenta y así esperemos que el abandono sea menor en futuros años. ¿Y qué nos queda a todos en estos momentos? Pues conciliar, reciclarnos, aprender tanto de nuestras materias como de las nuevas tecnologías. Ya lo decía el rector esta mañana, las TIC. Hay que estar al día tanto en nuestros conocimientos en nuestras disciplinas como en las herramientas informáticas, en las técnicas de información y de la comunicación que tan necesarias son para llevar la enseñanza a cualquier parte, en cualquier lugar y en cualquier momento. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Nos ha dicho la organización que ahora estamos todos invitados a una comida, así que se levanta la sesión y espero que haya sido exitosa y de su agrado, y muchos éxitos para todos. Gracias.